I think you also talked something about, value add.
Yeah.
So which is what's, I think, one of the fundamental difference between what you see in single family versus in a commercial property or in these types of deal.
Yeah.
Talk us a little bit through what that actually means, and one, what is an example of what you did as a value add at your assisted living facility,
Yeah.
and what that also translates in terms of appreciation or pricing perspective.
Sure. So when we evaluated this particular property that we own today, we look at the current state in
Okay.
terms of its financials, how it's operating. Due diligence is quite intense
Okay.
relative to standard multifamily residential, only because now you're looking at the business aspect as well, legal liability, staffing implications, diving deep into the operational expenses,
Yeah.
only because now that will directly affect
Sure.
your bottom line as well. So we were of course looking at the due diligence aspects there, but then we look at, okay, where can we take this business?
Yeah.
So like any business, where can we take it from a growth perspective?
Got it.
So then that's where our underwriting allows us to build a forecast.
Got it.
So we look at the current state and we say, what type of scenarios could essentially come to fruition? And for this property particularly, some low-hanging fruit was total capacity of the facility and what are they currently operating at.
Got it.
Total capacity is 130. I think they were operating at like 107
Gotcha.
at the time. So it's like, okay, we can add beds.
Yeah.
We can bring in more people, increase top line, and then ultimately we know that'll increase bottom line as well,
Yeah.
deducting expenses.
Yeah.
So that's an easy one. Before we went in, we were also looking at, okay, we can look at utility expenses there, see
Got
if
it.
there's opportunities to reduce
Yeah.
utility expenses because there's tons of grants in the market,
Yeah.
energy efficiency opportunities,
Yeah.
things like that, and contract-based
Got it.
reviews. So like waste management,
Sure.
cost of goods elements. So like,
Yeah.
I'm saying food, but it's not reducing the amount of food that goes to
Yeah.
our residents, but it's like if we're buying something at a per price per unit,
Sure.
can we get the same quality elsewhere for
100%.
another one?
100%.
So we negotiate directly with the vendor.
Yeah.
So there's few elements there, and then negotiating existing contracts also on top line. So one of the things that's possible in this space is building a relationship with the pharmacy company. As you can imagine,
Yeah.
medication and medication administration
Sure.
is a massive need within the home, but you can build a relationship with the pharmacy company where you can get into a potential long-term agreement with a stipend
Sure.
in place as well, which is reinvested back
Of course.
directly into the home, but that brings in additional revenue generating opportunities,
Yeah.
right? Even within care services,
Yeah.
if they are offering something but they're not charging for it, there may be a particular reason. Or if they're not offering something and we could offer it but provide it at a cost or a fee,
Yeah.
then there's an opportunity then to increase as well.
Got it.
So yeah, we went in, it was a business plan essentially, and it was executing against the business plan.
Amazing.
Quick wins, I can tell you like examples. We had a contract with a waste management company, a private waste management company. I think our cost for that was close to 30 grand a year.
Okay.
For waste management. I called up the city.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey city, how come you don't offer
Sure.
public waste management services for this? They're like, yeah, you're a commercial property, we don't typically offer it. But when I talked to the supervisor, again, you got to pick up the phone, start talking to people, right? Email, then pick up the phone, talk to people. He's like, oh, but if you have some sort of relationship, meaning or an existing agreement with the city of Windsor, this property is located in Windsor, we may be able to offer it.
Amazing.
So I'm like, listen, let me tell you a little bit about our facility. We actually have a subsidy agreement with the city of Windsor.
Amazing.
For about 60-65% of our residents.
Sure.
And I'm like, can you take this back?
Yeah.
The person got back to me, I think within a week, and they're like,
Yeah.
we've talked it through and we can offer it.
Right on.
Yeah, to you.
Right on.
We reduced our cost by 60%.
Amazing.
Just by going to
Right.
a municipal vendor,
Sure.
vendor directly
Sure.
for waste
Sure.
management.
Sure.
So we looked at different opportunities like that, had calls negotiated right on when we got there,
Yeah.
and we were able to increase the value
Yeah.
of the property and essentially refinance it within less than 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we
And
end up doing.
sorry, and when you say refinance, and now that the property's value has increased,
Yes.
you're able to take the money out, so you can actually, whether it's what you put in or whether it's more,
Yep.
you're able to take it out so that you can actually invest towards something else.
Exactly.
The basic fundamentals of building wealth, being able to refi properties from real estate and taking it out and investing again.
Exactly. It plays according to our business case.
Got it.
Right? So like,
Got it.
you have to run multiple scenarios, and
Yeah.
it was like, here's where we think we could reasonably get it.
Yeah.
You have an optimistic, conservative, and a more realistic scenario. Things may not always,
Yeah.
come out to fruition accordingly, but raising the value also means the property can sustain itself from an operational perspective, meaning from a expense perspective,
Sure.
or managing the expense perspective at the time of refinance. Because at the time of refinance, you're also
You
taking
still
on more
want to
debt.
be able to, yeah,
You're also taking
absolutely.
on more debt.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's just there's advantages to
Yeah.
it because it's tax-free money.
Yeah.
And you get to deploy that without
100%,
having to pay the
100%.
tax on it.
Yeah.
But you want to make sure that the property you're taking the money out
Yeah.
of can sustain that debt.
100%.
And it's difficult during
Yeah.
these times when interest rates are at
Yeah.
various levels. You need to make sure that not just the math works,
Yeah.
and it actually
Yeah.
operates accordingly as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's you touch base on a couple of things I want to touch base on, but we'll touch base on the last thing you just said. One,
Sure.
this is how, whether it's the wealthy or not, if you want to be able to access tax-free money, refining it out of property obviously is probably one of the easiest approaches or methods to be able to take out money or access cash to be able to build your wealth. That's the first thing.
Yep.
But the second thing you said is absolutely critical, right? Because it's one thing to be able to qualify for the refi to take the money out, but it's a completely different thing, which is what a lot of people unfortunately are suffering, even in the single family residential space, which is they were able to refi the money obviously when the interest rates were low and take money out because they qualified for it. But if the property doesn't pay for itself in today's environment, if you didn't underwrite it very conservatively in today's environment, you're essentially putting negative cash flow, or you have to put money out of your pocket to be able to sustain that initial refi, at which point does it really make a good business sense at that point, right?
100%.
Like, from that perspective. So it's very important when people are obviously leveraging to be able to take the money out, that they are underwriting in worst case scenarios, to your point, being able to know that, hey, interest rates doesn't always stay standstill. I understand nobody expected interest rates to hike at this pace per se over the last couple of years, but being able to plan for those things are obviously super key. So that being said, really, just to go back onto our original topic a little bit in terms of assisted living facility or commercial, just in general, really, you have a business plan anytime when you are operating a business with a real estate portfolio. The most important things are, this is where we fundamentally differ from a single family residential to this, which is, hey, you can find efficiencies to either cut down expenses or increase income. Yes. Whichever, either one of these that you do, you will ultimately, we won't get into the technical scope of like NOIs and all of that jazz today, cap rates, NOIs. Actually, maybe I'll ask you just to explain that a little bit shortly. But really, by doing all of these efficiencies, you're ultimately increasing the value of the property, which is the ARV or after renovation value or whatever the case may be, which ultimately is sort of the value add you put into the property. Then you're able to refi so that you can take the money out that you put in plus more or less and invest that towards something else.
100%.
Perfect.
Yep.
On that topic, maybe quickly, very high level, can we dive into NOI, net operating income, the values, as well as cap rates, just really at a very high level, just because I know we hear about it a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody has a good understanding of that, but I think just understanding what cap rates are, how does it differ based on properties, types, etc., and then how does it actually relate to NOIs and the value of the property.
Okay, for sure. So in standard residential properties, less than 5 units, the way to value that property is a comparable approach. So a comparable approach is when you look at recently sold properties of similar like condition. There's things that are done from an adjustment perspective, but very recently sold properties, likely within the last 6 months, that an appraiser can look at to then determine what the reasonable value of that property is. When you get into commercial properties, 5 units and more, and obviously alternative asset classes as well, there's 3 different ways to value it. I won't be able to think about all 3 ways right now, but there's the income approach, which is what we traditionally lean on. There's going to be the cost to build
Sure,
approach,
sure.
and there's another approach which which I can't think of right now.
That's fine.
We very much focus on the income approach.
Got it.
The financials of the business, and the income approach, very simply said, is looking at the net operating income, which is like equivalent to EBITDA, but net operating income, which is income minus expenses, that divided by a cap rate.
Okay.
A cap rate is called a capitalization rate. It's essentially the deemed yield for that property based off of its net operating income and purchase price, or really purchase price.
Yeah.
So for example, if you have $1 million property and the net operating income is $100,000, the yield or the cap rate is 10%.
Sure.
So if you're looking to buy if you're looking to buy a property, commercial, you tend to look at what is the net operating income of that property and share what the asking price is, which tells you what the cap rate is.
Okay.
Asking cap rate, but you have to look at what other properties, similar properties, are trading for.
Got it.
When I say trading, it's like what are they sold for?
Sure.
And so
Sure.
on. And this is where commercial appraisers can pull up data as it relates to other similar assets. It has to be similar assets.
Got it.
That have sold within a particular time
Sure.
period, and they have access to the financials.
Got it.
And they're able to say, okay, multifamily properties in this area between 10 to 15 units have traded or have sold at a 6 cap.
Right.
So then when you look at the property that you're interested in, you look at the net operating income, again calculated, right?
Yeah.
We'll dive into it a little bit.
Yeah, please.
Anytime you see a net operating income on paper, you do your own due diligence.
100%.
Right?
100%.
So there might be elements that are just excluded.
Yeah.
And again, not purposely.
Yeah.
Just maybe just doesn't come into
Every
thought.
operator is different.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have to look at the net operating income you need to consider from your business perspective.
Sure.
Then you take that net operating income and you divide that by the cap rate that an appraiser say gives you, the known cap rate for that market at the time, and you get the value. Yes.
Because so you get the net operating income, you divide that by the cap rate that you think should be applied for this particular building in this particular geographic area for this type of building, and the value you get versus the asking price should tell you if you're overpaying, underpaying, or if it's a fair price for what the market is asking.
100%.
Okay.
One other element I'd add to that is that tells you exactly to your point, whether you're overpaying, underpaying, or whether you're at market value. The other thing we look at very closely is real estate naturally is a space where we look to leverage money.
Yep.
And we leverage money from what you know as traditional lenders, banks, things of that nature. And when you go to a bank for money, one of the things they care about not just is the valuation of the property, is what they call the debt service coverage ratio.
Okay.
So it's DSCR, and all that is, very simply said, is the net operating income divided by the cost to service debt. Again, net operating income is on an annual basis, and the cost to service debt would be on an annual basis. That divided by the cost to service debt.
Okay. The other way around.
Or the other way around. The other way around. Debt service coverage ratio divided by the net operating income. And if that is typically 1.2 or greater, that's when the lender is okay giving you that loan amount.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
Because you have a loan amount, you have the debt servicing associated with that loan amount. Then when you divide that by the NOI, you ultimately get what it is the NOI divided by the
to be able to get the DSCR, your debt servicing ratio. Okay, gotcha. So obviously on that note, so one of the things to note is really lending also works very differently when it comes to commercial properties, whether it's assisted living or multifamily. Do traditional lenders like your banks do these types of lending, or other sources that our viewers could, like if they're exploring a property to see if they can qualify for obviously lending or mortgages, etc. Who are some typical lenders that that you can work with? Because I know there's traditional and non-traditional lenders when it comes to this as well.
For sure. So the traditional lenders are the type A lenders that you see and are well advertised in the market. The non-traditional lenders are available to both residential and commercial, which is like your B lenders. And your B lenders are out there and they might have a little bit more flexible rules when it comes to lending, but typically the cost to borrow goes up as well.
Okay.
Then you have your credit unions,
Okay.
And your credit unions, they work a little bit different. They're more very specific to the market.
Yeah.
They do market-based lending
Got
because
it.
they understand and they're in
That
that
particular
market.
local market,
Yeah,
yeah.
and credit unions, I believe, are typically owned by the account
members,
holders,
yeah.
the members, and so they're very much focused on a particular market.
Sure.
You can have credit unions that are large that have multiple locations, but if you go to a particular credit union at a location, they're very much focused on
Got it.
on that location. Then you have private lending,
Yeah.
right? You have institutional type private lending, like your
Yeah.
mix of the
Yeah.
world, and then you have like more traditional private lending
Yeah.
as well, which is non-traditional at the end of the day,
Yeah.
but it's
Within the space
within the
itself,
space. Yeah, exactly.
And one thing that typically comes up, and I know many people that I've spoken to, they think it's a completely different thing, but CMHC lending, for example, right? So like, talk to us a little bit about that, just to educate some of the viewers in terms of how that plays as part of when you do these types of deals. There are some benefits, some disadvantages, depending on how you use the CMHC lender or lending. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Maybe first caveat. This is just based off of my experience,
100%.
right?
Yeah,
At the
yeah,
end
yeah,
of the
of
day,
course.
you have to work with a qualified professional. So we'll mention that as a
Understood.
caveat.
Yeah, of course.
But our experience, more so with CMHC, is a lot more stringent requirements at the end of the day in terms of documentation and what they're looking for. They are an insured lender of the federal government. At the end of the day, I believe they're a crown corporation, but CMHC has their own mandates as it relates to housing. There's a few, but they want to increase housing supply.
Sure.
They're very much in supportive of multifamily.
Sure.
They have an arm for supportive housing and retirement homes as well, and they support construction as well. They come up with their own valuation at the end of the day, so they have their own internal exercise as it relates to valuation. So we just talked about the income approach, and they very much will use that, but then they might use a different cap or assess the income differently as well. So you have to work with the lender to understand ultimately what they're looking for. But they offer lots of benefits as well.
Got it.
Their benefits typically is a conventional lender might limit you, in commercial, might limit you to 75% loan to value. So the loan they're providing to the value that's determined is at 75%, right?
Yeah.
Versus CMHC, depending on the program, could go up to 95%.
Okay.
So that's a game changer,
Of course.
ultimately, in what your down payment would look like. But the property or the project needs to make sense in order to get
And
that.
within CMHC's guidelines
Within
and priorities.
CMHC's guidelines, yeah.
Got it.
They have a particular program called the MLI Select.
Gotcha.
And that program, I tell you, I think it was pretty hot for a while.
Yeah.
And now it's getting even more difficult to sort of navigate.
Yeah.
And one of the criteria they essentially look at under that program is like energy efficiency standards,
Gotcha.
affordability, and like meeting accessibility standards as well. You just have to get a particular set of points in order to qualify accordingly. So there's usually like work that needs to be done to the property in order to meet the standard.
Got it.
And it needs to be sustained. So affordability, for example, you're getting into an agreement where I think you are essentially guaranteeing that rent will stay within a particular affordable amount for a period of time.
Got it.
And it's 5 or 10 years or whatever it may be, depending on your term. And what that means is every year you have annual reporting.
Got it.
That comes with that stipulation as well. Similar to commercial, but CMHC a little bit more stringent. And you have to make sure you meet those standards. Because then if not, you're potentially putting your loan at risk.
Yeah, and so I think really the main thing to understand is, depending on the project and depending on where you want to focus as an investor or as an operator, there are options out there even from a lending perspective. It's just a matter of just like knowledge is power, just getting out there and researching these types of information, because it might just make sure that you can get your project underway versus maybe a traditional lender may not be able to qualify you for a mortgage based on XYZ down payment versus a CMHC might. It's just a matter of you actually doing your research to actually see what is a good fit for you.
100%. And that research comes from our perspective, working with knowledgeable brokers.
Got it.
For example, right? Like we know we can go directly to a bank.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, they may or may not be able to do it. But a knowledgeable broker who's done many different deals, many deals of a particular type, that's how you kind of bring them into the power team, right? You got to do interviews, you got to understand what's available in the market, what experience they have. And when you work with, say, knowledgeable professionals at the end of the day, they tell you what the options are as well. And it matters when you consider that as part of your due diligence, because the strategy matters on financing. So for example, CMHC, we typically wouldn't look at that as like on purchase.
Yeah.
Because the timelines
Yeah.
to get a certificate of insurance, for example, with CMHC, have ranged.
Yeah.
But in the last 2 years, it's taken up to 8 months
Got it.
to get a certificate of insurance.
Gotcha.
Nowadays, I've been hearing it's closer to like 12 to 16 weeks.
Yeah.
But that means, would you potentially get into a purchase agreement and have an extended due diligence period of 90 days or longer in order to get that certificate of insurance?
Got it.
I wouldn't want to be in a position where I waive that condition and not
without
have
having,
not having the
absolutely,
financing in place,
absolutely.
right? So again, that matters on sort of the strategy on purchase. The financing strategy matters
Yeah.
ultimately on to get into the property.
Yeah.
But CMHC also could work as a great avenue on exit, meaning on stabilization.
Sure,
Because
sure.
you already have the property, you're working on your business case, you look to execute the business case, and then you exit or provide stabilization-based financing with CMHC.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
So really, I mean, what I wanted to do next was maybe jump into a little bit about your personal why in terms of why you got into this space. But before we sort of jump into that, so really, I think I wanted to wrap it up, and then I wanted to give you a space to give your final comment. But really, single-family residential from a real estate, wealth building perspective versus a commercial or alternative asset class, obviously, ton of differences. Definitely much more complex. A team sport. Lots of other professionals are involved as part of the process, etc. Obviously, the ability for someone to scale and to be able to grow wealth is significantly probably higher.
Yeah.
That being said, it's not necessarily for the faint of heart, to some extent, unfortunately, because there are lots of challenges that come, your way as well, right, within that space. I wanted to just kind of pick your brain. I mean, I know whether from a regulatory perspective or even just standard operational perspective, challenges, setbacks come just as lots of challenges will come in your way where you have to overcome whether you like it or not, because you're operating a business at one point, right? Give me an example of some of these challenges that has come your way, and how do you sort of overcome that, and walk us through, like, what is your mindset as an individual, as an owner operator in some of these buildings and businesses?
For sure. Great question. I think the first key approach both my business partner and I have is a problem is a problem. We just are problem solvers at the end of the day. I think if you have the problem solver mindset, you will figure out a solution. It's, problems have all different kinds of challenges, but it's like, can you get over that hump, right? We've had to deal with all different kinds of issues, and I guess if I had to give an example, we were just talking about financing. All right. So on our purchase of the property that we currently have, the assisted living property, we'd engaged 2 lenders, one directly and one through a broker as well, and both lenders had given us one a term sheet and one a letter of intent.
Okay.
There's differences and nuances between both. We had pursued the letter of intent because the terms overall were more favorable for us. We'd gone firm on the deal at the time, and it shows that even with a particular set of experience, that things like that happen, knowing that, okay, we have a good letter of intent and they've already expressed interest, and they said, like, financing shouldn't, be a problem. Probably close to 2 weeks before closing, the lender says, we're not able to provide financing.
Oh, no.
For the deal, and you can imagine how stressful that could become. I think I remember when I got the call, my daughter was just born. She was a day old.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, all right, listen, I got to get to this.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And my wife was in the hospital, and I'm like, I have a problem I gotta deal with. And I got in a call with my business partner, and I'm like, here's the situation. Got on a call with the broker, and we're like, what just happened? We wanted to get the rundown of the information, understand if there's what the particular challenges were, obviously give it one more shot in terms of addressing those challenges. And I can tell you, the challenge that they'd highlighted is that on paper did not have the experience to operate an assisted living facility. And we were sort of, boggled by that, because we haven't owned and operated assisted living, but the structure we actually pursued is obviously our own experiences relates to asset management and operations, but we also partnered with an advisor who has owned, operated, exited off of these spaces. That was a strategic partnership.
Yep.
And then we had to do an interview with the City of Windsor because they wouldn't just hand over, say, the subsidy agreement. Exactly, and licensing. And we were able to convince them, right, that we were able to do this. Anyways, that was the same information that we had to submit as part of a business case to the lender. But again, someone somewhere made a decision, even though they had shared with us that financing would be good. Okay, we had to pivot. And ultimately, the pivot was go back to the other lender who had a term sheet that they provided. So just for viewers,
of course.
The difference is on an LOI is a letter of intent. So we have intent
to give you
pursue this deal versus a term sheet is like we've done more detailed due diligence on the property. We've looked at all the financials and our credit team has actually given us the go ahead on this. The credit team has to give you the go ahead. Very, very, very key. So a term sheet is also equivalent to a commitment letter.
Sure.
So you can look at it from that perspective. Called up the lender directly and I'm like, listen, here's my situation, be very transparent. I know we can't close the deal in 2 weeks, but are you willing to look at this again? And nothing's changed from a numbers perspective or deal perspective. Can you bring a new term sheet forward? Ultimately, the answer was yes.
Amazing.
It cost us a little bit more to get the term sheet forward because it was deemed expedited. We'd share that information back with the sellers. Got an extension. And we ended up closing the deal.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on getting it done. But really, it all goes back to the mindset at the end of the day, right? Like, the moment you realize, when you're in a leadership role, you got to be solving problems, and that is your ultimate priority. Everything else becomes like, okay, we just got to figure out how to do it. Like, there's always ways to do it. There are resources out there. We just got to figure out how to actually get it done.
For sure.
Amazing. On that note, what do you intend the next 5, 10, 15 years to be for Lou Ventures? Talk to me through a little bit of that. Just curious.
For sure, grow in this space.
Okay.
We're always open to exploring different opportunities. But what we know, what we have gained experience with is really assisted living in the retirement home space.
Amazing.
And I think we're certainly looking to grow in that space because this is what, we know there's real opportunity in the space and it's a real need as well. That's why one of the things that's important for us is needs-based assets. And we also see this as a for-profit social enterprise. Right, and we know we're offering a real needed service in the community. We just have to meet those standards. So I think we're certainly looking to grow and acquire more assets in this space. One of the things we always talk about is potential vertical integration. So are there other potential businesses that would merge and complement exactly the business, right? And that could be anything, honestly, from like pharmacy services to transportation, cost of goods, cleaning, all of those different staffing, all of those different pieces. It's not on our radar just yet, so I would say that's a little bit longer. Maybe the 5-year mark. And so between my business partner and I, like why we do this is so we can be in a better state than we are, today. Us growing in the space, will there be a potential exit? Potentially, I don't really know, right? But it's long-term assets. We would hold these assets for the long term and continue to operate them, right? We don't, to be honest, we don't look 15 years out. We hope we anyone. We don't really know what might happen. But for sure, in the next 5 years, we'll continue to acquire.
Amazing. And I think that's the most important thing, right? Like one is, you've got into a space, whether it's you or anybody else. Like once you get into the space, if you really want to be able to grow wealth, yes, you got to be able to scale, and the scaling can come in many different ways. And one, you being open-minded, one, you being knowledgeable, one, you being able to speak to other partners or other people is what enables you to be able to grow and complement your existing business structures, and then be able to go whether you're scaling horizontally into many different facilities or whether you want to scale vertically, you have the options to be able to do so 100%. Once you put in the work. You said something very interesting. So you're obviously building wealth. Tell me why. Like, why is that important for you?
It starts from, honestly, like the sacrifices my parents have made to like get here offer us the, get us exposed to the opportunities that we are blessed to have really in the country we live in today in Canada.
Yeah.
And one of the stories I've been like recently mentioning is the fact that like growing up, our family, like my family, we've never gone out to dinner together.
Sure.
As a family outside. And it comes from sort of that immigrant mentality where we'll grind, hustle to sort of make it. Yeah. And spending money outside on a restaurant wasn't in the picture.
Exactly.
I'm at that point now where my son says we can go to our cottage. Like he can go to his own cottage. Sure. And like you can kind of tell like where we are. Yeah. Right? And that's like sort of a massive realization for me, and like being able to take advantage of the opportunities that exist to us today. Because I feel like we do a disservice in not being able to do that, right? And getting uncomfortable and taking these risks, because I feel like my parents took a risk coming here, starting life all over again, and giving us the opportunity to do exactly this, right? And so the next steps, I sort of see it as giving my family the opportunity that we never had. We never had. Yeah, we never had growing up, right? And it comes with a bit of balance as well, for sure. Yeah. But like can my son and daughter pursue their passions without ever having to worry about paying the bills? Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of structure to that at the end of the day. But can they pursue their passions and whatever they want, ultimately knowing that they don't need to worry about.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? I mean, it's an incredible story of resilience at the end of the day, right? Starting from your parents to you guys, being able to really come with not much, when you come to the country, and then be able to build, and then really build that generational wealth in one way, shape, or form. For sure. You really want to be able to provide for your family what you necessarily didn't have, but ultimately that comes with a pretty big responsibility on your part as well. Yeah. Because I know we spoke about this offline, it's one thing to be able to build wealth, but it's another thing to be able to make sure that we preserve what we are building and then really, transferring that to the next generation in one way, shape, or form. Of course, there's the technical elements of tax efficiency and estate planning and all that stuff, but before we get into that, what do you fear the most when you're transferring generational wealth from you to your kids? Right. Is there anything that comes to your mind? Not that fear, but things that you want to be maybe careful about.
Yeah, for sure. Outside of the things on paper, to be very honest with you, is like values. Yeah. Right? Absolutely. And I think it's super important that my kids don't just think that this is just handed to them and it's just there, and they don't understand the work that it takes to, I want them to be problem solvers. Of course. At the end of the day, and instill good values where they're doing good. Yeah. My biggest fear is like we're working on building wealth. I gotta, obviously flip to preserving that wealth, and then making sure that at the point of transfer, it's not just it's transferred efficiently, but it's transferred in a manner in which it allows them to take those risks and like pursue the opportunities and passions that they want to do. Yeah. But in a way where I've still instilled good values and they can use that moving forward.
Yeah. So you want to make sure you can empower them to be able to obviously grow, what you build and be able to help others, etc. But you also want to make sure it doesn't make them lazy in any way, or essentially like just make sure that they know how to manage what they've earned at the end of the day, right? Like so that's value-based, principles-based approaches, like very, very key, because I get a chance to speak to a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, and the one thing they say is it's a set of problems you have when you don't have much wealth, right? Like you're trying to make sure you're making ends meet, you're trying to make sure you feed your family, all that is important. Yeah. But once you build a set of wealth, it's like only you know the amount of work that has gone into building this wealth. Right. So you want to make sure that when you're transferring it down, the next generation is able to respect what has been built and then build continuously on that. For sure. And Pri, just on that note, just as we wrap this up, like I know you and I again spoke about, unfortunately we hear about people who either have to pay a lot of taxes when they're passing wealth, or they didn't necessarily always have documentations in terms of like wills, power of attorneys, that kind of stuff. If you think about wealth preservation and wealth transfer, tell me like one or two things that comes to your mind and why that is important for you.
Yeah. I think you've hit the points, to be honest, because it's efficiency.
Yeah.
So it's very easy, and even on our end, it's like we're at the point where we're very much focused on building wealth.
Yeah.
Right, and we know we need to preserve, and we know the transfer piece comes about, and we think about some of the what happens,
Sure.
and part of that is setting up certain things like life insurance,
Yeah.
for example. But what are some of the other elements that is required in order to efficiently preserve and efficiently transfer?
Yeah.
I think that's where we'd work with.
Sure.
Someone like you and your team to
Yeah.
make sure that the key questions are asked and answered
Yeah.
in a way where
Yeah.
where we can set
Absolutely.
up.
Yeah. So I mean, just to really reiterate, I mean, it's one thing to be able to build wealth, but
Yeah.
it's a completely different thing to be able to make sure you're preserving and transferring it, efficiently. At the end of the day, that's one thing. But also, like, I always ask, like, sometimes we don't necessarily put some of these strategies in place, but do I want my 18-year-old to have access to $10 million all of a
Right.
sudden if I passed away at that time, right?
Right.
So, because oftentimes if you don't end up putting some of these strategy structures, from a tax minimization, yes, but also, like, I feel like you're building a legacy for yourself. You truly want that legacy to last much more than the next generation,
Right.
and be there in the next 5, 10, 15 years to be able to remember somebody. Planning has to go into it. So just as important as it is to build wealth, it is just as important to preserve and transfer that to the next generation, or generations to come at the end of the day.
100%. And like there might be some questions that and with answers that you might already
Yeah.
know, but I think sometimes just say working with you, for example,
Yeah.
you ask these questions, which then forces us to think about the
Sure.
answers, right? Because
Sure.
depending on the answers, the strategy
Yeah.
and the plan would
Of course.
ultimately change. And even at the point, and I think this applies because even at the point of building wealth,
Yeah.
we look at how should we structure our corporation,
Sure.
how should we structure our financing
Sure.
for the next purchase, based
Sure.
off of what you want to do for preservation
Yeah.
and transfer. You might
There are
structure
certain
some
things you
things
can
differently.
do earlier on.
100%,
Absolutely.
and that can really very much apply
Absolutely.
during the building
Absolutely.
wealth phase,
For
right?
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Pri, it's been an interesting hour. I mean, just really
Yeah.
understanding, what is it that you do, obviously, with the assisted living facility. Because, again, I think one of the reasons why I wanted you to come is to really explain to our viewers, hey, single-family residential is great. Everybody has to start somewhere. I'm a big believer of that. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes you got to take risks, and of course, do it in a calculated way. Obviously, make sure you're learning your aspects, just the techniques and all that stuff, the technical stuff. But sometimes people always think getting into the bigger space means it's much scarier and it's not meant for everybody. But if Pri is doing it, if many people like Pri are doing it, of course there's an element of wanting to build wealth, and of course the knowledge piece has to go into it. But maybe give them one or two advice that you would say, hey, why is it important to get into that space, just as we wrap this up, and what is it one thing that helped you get there, and something that they can actually do today to actually look at how to build wealth in that space.
For sure. I think it's not impossible, right? It's certainly possible. It's the how.
Yeah.
And when you think about how you can get some of those questions answered in your head, it'll usually end up being around connecting with the right people and learning from their experiences and applying what you learn from them, or working directly
Sure.
with them as well, right? And I think those are some of the key elements that allow you to enter
Yeah.
this space, and everything. If you do then get comfortable with that thought process, then everything from there is going to be something new that you'll learn, that you'll ultimately continue
100%.
to apply, right? Because you won't know everything. You won't know the answer to every question
Exactly.
before you jump in. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah.
We still don't know a lot of stuff.
Of course.
And we know the next time we're going to learn something
100%.
new, right? It's just where in the phase of applying that are you?
Yeah.
I wouldn't go into anything blind.
Yeah.
So then, strategically partner
Yeah.
with some folks who can take you along.
Yeah.
With that journey, right? And I think it's folks often say this, like the group of people around you matter,
100%.
right?
100%.
And depending on what they're talking about and what
Yeah.
they're doing,
Yeah.
it sort of elevates
Sure.
ultimately what you're doing
Yeah.
as well. Or really you're looking to get to that level. So if people around you are hanging out with individuals who are operating different businesses, you are going to want to build a business and be a high net worth individual.
100%.
Yeah.
So really, as we wrap it up, I'll say one thing that you just mentioned, which is, hey, don't go into anything blindly.
Yep.
Do your due diligence, learn about something.
For sure.
But don't be afraid to take action. Partner up with the right people.
100%.
Essentially, others might be able to bring skill sets into your game plan that might help you elevate and empower you to be able to execute the plan that you have in mind or a vision you have in mind.
100%.
Pri, before we let you go, if our viewers want to be able to find out more information about Lou Ventures, where can they go to find out more? Our
website, louventures.ca. We're on social media as well. Our personal social media. So Pri Uthayakumar is my social handle, so you'll be able to find me there.
Awesome.
Send me a DM. We can connect from there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Pri, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for making the time for us today, and obviously, really enlightening us, educating us about single family versus multifamily or commercial spaces, and some of the ins and outs of that as well. So thanks a lot for your time, and thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me here. This has been an absolute pleasure, and we look forward to working with you and your team as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.